There's a moment I keep returning to, even now. Not the applause. Not the speeches. Not even the look on my father's face when he finally understood what I had spent 11 years becoming. It's the quiet that came right before all of it. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind that settles over a room and makes every person in it hold their breath without knowing why. I was standing in the doorway of the Westfield Grange Event Hall in Raleigh, North Carolina, wearing my army dress uniform. Every ribbon and citation exactly where it belonged. And I remember thinking, this is the moment. The one I didn't know I'd been waiting for since I was 19 years old, and my father told me I was throwing my life away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's always been one of my problems, according to him, jumping to the end before earning it. So let me start from the beginning. I grew up in a house where expectations were handed down like heirlooms. My grandfather had been a dentist. My father was an oral surgeon. My mother taught music at the same private school she and my father had both attended. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Cary, North Carolina, and every room in that house knew exactly what it was supposed to be. I was supposed to be pre-med. That was the plan from before I could articulate a plan of my own. Not because anyone sat me down and said it outright. It was more like the air in our house carried that assumption the way other houses carry the smell of whatever's cooking. You didn't question it. You just breathed it. My brother was 6 years older than me and already in his second year at UNC Chapel Hill, studying biology when I started high school. He was the blueprint. Quiet, focused, effortlessly good at the things that mattered in our family. He got into Duke's dental program on his first application. My father cried at dinner the night that letter came. I was 16 when I watched that and understood, somewhere in my chest, that I would never produce that same feeling in him. Not because I wasn't smart. I was smart. But because I didn't want the same things, and wanting different things in our house was a kind of failure no one had a word for yet. I spent 2 years trying anyway. I signed up for AP Biology. I volunteered at a hospital on weekends. I said the right things at family dinners when relatives asked about my plans. I smiled and nodded and told my grandmother I was thinking about medicine. Yes, definitely. Of course. And then I met Captain Diane Holt. She came to our school for a career day my junior year, one of maybe 15 presenters set up at folding tables in the gymnasium. Most of my classmates walked past her table without stopping. I don't know what made me stop. Something in how she stood, maybe. Or the way she didn't seem to need anyone to look at her to feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was an army officer. She'd done 2 deployments, one in Afghanistan, one in Kuwait. She talked about logistics and leadership, and the kind of problem-solving that doesn't show up in textbooks. She talked about what it meant to be responsible for people, not just outcomes. I stood at her table for 40 minutes. My friend had to come find me. I went home that afternoon and looked up ROTC scholarship programs for 4 straight hours. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I told my mother first the following spring, a few weeks before high school graduation. I sat her down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon when my father was at the office, and I laid it out as clearly as I could. I'd been accepted to NC State on a full Army ROTC scholarship. I wanted to study criminal justice. I wanted to commission as an officer after graduation. My mother listened the way she always listened. Quietly, hands folded, expression controlled. When I finished, she said, "Your father is going to be very upset." That was her first sentence. Not "what do you think, sweetheart," or "tell me more." Just a warning about his reaction, as if my news was primarily something that would need to be managed. She wasn't wrong. My father came home at 6:30. My mother had apparently given him some kind of heads up, because he walked into the kitchen looking the way he looked before difficult conversations. Jaw set, tie loosened but not removed, a particular stillness about him that I'd learned to recognize as controlled anger. He sat down across from me at the table. He asked me to explain myself, as if I'd done something that required an explanation rather than a celebration. I told him everything I'd told my mother. I was proud of myself for keeping my voice steady. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You understand this is not what I had in mind for you." I said I understood. "Your brother is going to be a dentist," he said, as if I might have forgotten. "Your grandfather was a dentist. There's a legacy here. There's a path." I told him I had my own path. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "You're going to spend 4 years earning a criminal justice degree, and then let the army tell you where to live and what to do and whether you can come home for Christmas. And you think that's a better life than what I'm offering you?" I said I thought it was the right life for me. He stood up from the table. He didn't yell, he never yelled. He just said, very evenly, "I hope you know what you're doing, because I don't think you do." And then he walked out of the kitchen. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. Then she got up and started making dinner. I commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the Army at 22 years old. My mother came to the ceremony. My father did not. He said he had a patient he couldn't reschedule. My mother said it with the careful neutrality of someone repeating a prepared statement. I nodded and said I understood, and then I drove back to my apartment afterward and sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. That was 2016. I want to be clear about something. My father wasn't a villain. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He didn't cut me off financially or forbid me from coming home, or say terrible things that I could point to and say, "There, that's the wound." He was subtler than that. He had a way of being present, without actually being present, of engaging with me enough to technically be a participant in my life without ever really seeing me. Family dinners during the years I was stationed at Fort Bragg, which was only 45 minutes from home, a fact that felt cosmically ironic, followed a pattern I could have scripted. My father would ask my brother about his practice. He would ask my mother about school. He would ask me if he asked me anything at all, something generic. How's work? Are they keeping you busy? Staying safe out there? And then he'd move on before I finished answering. I watched my brother buy a house in Chapel Hill, and my father drive up with a truck full of furniture he'd picked out specifically. I watched him go to every one of my nephew's soccer games for 6 years straight. I watched him cry again when my brother got married in 2019, the same way he'd cried over the dental school letter. This open, uncomplicated pride that I had never once in my life received from him. I'm not saying I was miserable. I want to be accurate here, not dramatic. I loved my work. I was good at it, genuinely good, in a way that surprised even me sometimes. I was promoted ahead of schedule. I had soldiers who trusted me, colleagues who respected me, commanders who wrote things in my evaluations that made me read the words twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. I made captain at 26. I deployed to South Korea for 13 months. I came back and was selected for the advanced civil schooling program and completed a master's in organizational leadership at Georgetown on the Army's dime. I made major at 30. I was assigned to the Pentagon for a 2-year tour and worked alongside people whose names I'd read in briefing documents for years. None of this made it back to my father's dinner table as anything more than a general acknowledgement that I seemed to be doing fine. What I'm saying is, I had built something real. I had built it entirely on my own, without his approval and without his help, and I had stopped needing either of those things. Or I told myself I had stopped needing them, which is mostly the same thing, except for the moments when it isn't. My brother announced his engagement in January of last year. He called me on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual enough that I answered on the first ring. He was marrying a woman named Abby whom he'd been dating for 3 years, a pediatric nurse practitioner from Wilmington whom I had met twice and liked both times. The wedding would be in October, at a venue in Raleigh. He wanted me to be there. I said of course I'd be there. He paused, and then he said, "Mads, there's something I want to ask you." He was the only person in the world who called me Mads. My name is Madeline, and I had been called that my whole life by everyone except him. And somehow that small thing had always made me feel like maybe there was one person in my family who actually saw me. "Abby's grandfather was career Army," he said. "He's passed away 2 years ago. She's always wanted a military wedding. A real one, with the saber arch and everything. I've been trying to figure out how to make that happen for her, and..." He stopped. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to coordinate it, with your connections. And, I mean, if you wanted to wear your uniform, I think that would be amazing. I think Abby would love it." I sat with that for a second. "You want me to coordinate a military ceremony at your wedding," I said. "I want you there," he said. "And I want you to be exactly who you are when you're there. Not just my sister in a dress. I want Dad to see who you actually are." I didn't say anything for a moment. "He never comes to see me at work," I said. "I know," he said. "So let me bring it to him." I agreed. I told him I'd reach out to some call. I did not tell him how much that phone call meant to me, because I am my father's daughter in at least one way. I don't always say the things I actually feel. The problem started about 6 weeks before the wedding. My father called me. This was notable enough that I remember exactly where I was, sitting in my car outside a Whole Foods in Arlington, grocery bags in the back seat. He called me on a Wednesday evening, and my first thought, genuinely, was that something bad had happened. Nothing had happened. He had just decided to tell me something. "I've been thinking about the wedding," he said after a brief and slightly uncomfortable preamble about nothing. "And I have to be honest with you. I'm a little concerned about the military element." I waited. "I just think, it's your brother's day. And Abby's. And I wonder if having all the ceremony stuff, and you in uniform might make it feel like it's about something other than them. Like it's about you." There it was. I kept my voice even. I told him that my brother had specifically asked me to do this. That Abby wanted it, that it was something she'd dreamed about. "I'm sure she appreciates the gesture," he said. "But you know how things can look. You showing up in uniform with all the..." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words. "The decorations and everything. It might seem like you're trying to make a point." "What point would I be making?" I asked. "I just think there might be other ways to support your brother that don't involve..." Another pause. "Drawing attention to yourself." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Dad, he asked me to do this. This isn't something I suggested." "I know," he said. "I just think you might want to consider how it will feel for the rest of the family. It can be a lot. People aren't always familiar with all of it, and sometimes it can feel like..." "Like what?" I said. He didn't finish the sentence. We said goodbye a few minutes later, politely, the way we always said goodbye, as if the conversation had been about something ordinary. I sat in my car for a while after I hung up. The groceries in the back seat included a rotisserie chicken and a bag of baby carrots and a bottle of wine. I suddenly felt like opening in the parking lot. I called my brother that night. I told him about the conversation. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mads, you are wearing your uniform to my wedding. That is final. I will handle Dad." I don't know what he said to our father. He never told me, and I never asked. What I know is that my father called me 3 days later and said, stiffly, that he looked forward to seeing me at the wedding. I said I looked forward to it too. I did not say what else I was thinking. Which was, I have 11 years of service, 2 deployments, a master's degree from Georgetown, and a promotion track that my commanding officer described last year as exceptional, and my father just called my uniform decorations. I didn't say that. I poured myself a glass of the wine I'd been saving, and I sat by the window of my apartment in Arlington, and I watched the lights of the city come on one by one, and I thought about that 19-year-old girl sitting at a folding table in a gymnasium, listening to a woman who stood like she didn't need anyone to look at her. You knew what you were doing, I thought. You always knew. The October morning of my brother's wedding was one of those unreasonably beautiful fall days that North Carolina produces like it's showing off. 72 degrees, clear sky. The maples along the entrance to the Westfield Grange turned a color that doesn't have a precise name but lands somewhere between copper and fire. I drove down from Arlington the night before and stayed in a hotel 15 minutes from the venue. My brother had texted me that morning, "You ready?" And I had sent back a thumbs up because I didn't know what else to say. I got dressed in my hotel room. I'd done it 100 times, but I took my time that morning. Each item in order, the way I'd been taught, the way it had become second nature years ago. My ribbons, my rank, my nameplate. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. I had spent 11 years becoming the person looking back at me. I had worked in environments where the stakes were not theoretical, where the decisions I made affected real people and real outcomes. I had earned everything on that uniform, 1 year, and 1 assignment and 1 evaluation at a time. I was not going to apologize for any of it. I arrived at the venue at 2 in the afternoon. The ceremony was at 4. I had coordinated with 6 colleagues. 4 from my time at Fort Bragg, 2 from the Pentagon, who had agreed to serve as the Sabre detail. They were already there when I arrived, in their own dress uniforms, setting up in the lobby with the easy professionalism of people who knew exactly what they were doing. I also knew, though I had not told my family, that there would be additional guests. Abby's late grandfather had been part of a veterans association that met monthly in Raleigh. When Abby's mother found out there was going to be a military element to the ceremony, she had quietly reached out to the association. The response had been extraordinary. 63 veterans, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, spanning 5 decades of service, had asked if they could attend to honor Abby's grandfather and welcome her into the family through the ceremony he would have loved to see. I had spoken to the association's coordinator on the phone 2 weeks earlier, a retired master sergeant named, and I will tell you his name because he earned it, Theodore Webb, who had served in the Gulf War and had a voice like gravel wrapped in something warm. "We'll be there," he'd said simply. "We take care of our own." I hadn't told my brother. I wanted it to be a surprise. What I had not anticipated was how that room would feel when it filled. My father arrived at 3 with my mother and my aunt. I watched them from across the lobby. My father was in a navy suit, silver tie, the same careful presentation he'd worn to every significant event of his adult life. He saw me almost immediately. He crossed the room. My mother kissed my cheek and said I looked beautiful. My aunt, who had always been kind to me, squeezed both my hands and said, "Oh, honey." My father looked at me for a moment, at the uniform, at everything on it, and said, "You look well," in the tone he used for things he was acknowledging without endorsing. "Thank you," I said. "All set for your part?" he asked. "The way you might ask a caterer if the tables were ready." "Yes," I said. He nodded and moved on to find his seat. I stood there for a second. My aunt caught my eye from a few feet away and gave me a small, private look that said, "I know." "I see it. I'm sorry." I appreciated it more than I could have explained. The ceremony itself was everything my brother had hoped for. Abby walked down the aisle on her mother's arm looking like she was made of something stronger and softer than ordinary people, which is exactly what I think she is. My brother's face when he saw her was the kind of thing you don't narrate. The saber arch at the end of the ceremony was flawless. My colleagues executed it perfectly. 6 officers in dress uniform, sabers raised, the couple passing beneath them into their new life together. There was a moment when the last saber came down, and one of my colleagues said, the traditional words. And I watched Abby's mother press her hand to her mouth, and I understood then what this ceremony had meant to this family, and I was grateful to have been the one to bring it. What happened next? I had planned but could not have fully prepared myself for. As the wedding party moved from the ceremony room to the reception hall, the 63 veterans from the association, who had been seated in a section to the side and had attended the ceremony quietly, without announcement, stood. They didn't make a sound at first. They simply stood, all 63 of them, in a single motion, the way people do when something is worth standing for. And then Theodore Webb, who was standing in the aisle, turned to where I was walking and said, in a voice that carried clearly through the entire room, "Officer on the floor." Every veteran in that section came to attention. I don't have a word for what I felt in that moment. I've thought about it since, tried to find the right one, and I haven't managed it. It wasn't pride exactly, or it wasn't only pride. It was more like being recognized by people who understood, in a specific and earned way, what recognition meant. People who had learned in the same hard school I had, that you don't give it freely and you don't receive it lightly. I stopped walking. I looked at Theodore Webb and I brought my hand to my brow. The room was completely quiet, and then the applause started. And it wasn't just the veterans. It was the whole room, all 200 guests, on their feet, and I stood in the middle of it, and tried to keep my face together and mostly failed. I looked for my brother across the room. He was standing next to his new wife with his hands clasped in front of him, watching me, and he was crying in the open and uncomplicated way. I'd only ever seen him cry at good things, and I thought, this is what he meant. This is why he called me. I did not look for my father immediately. I needed a moment first. When I finally did, I found him standing near the entrance to the reception hall, very still, the way he went still when he was processing something he hadn't prepared for. He was watching me. Not watching the room, not watching the veterans, not watching his son, watching me. And his expression was something I had not seen on his face before, or not directed at me. It was the expression of a person who is recalibrating. I held his gaze for a second. Then the moment broke, and people started moving again, and I was surrounded by people I didn't know who wanted to shake my hand, and I let myself be carried by it. The reception was everything a reception is supposed to be. Good food, too much wine, dancing that got progressively worse as the evening continued, and the particular warm chaos of two families becoming one. I was at the bar getting a glass of water around 8:30 when my father appeared beside me. I sensed him before I saw him, the specific presence of someone who is approaching carefully, the way you approach something you're not sure of. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" he said. We found 2 chairs at a small table near the edge of the room, slightly separated from the main crowd. He sat across from me and he looked at his hands for a moment, which was something I'd never seen him do. "I owe you an apology," he said. I waited, not just for the phone call, he said, for a lot of things, for a long time. I kept my face neutral. I had built that skill over years of environments where keeping your face neutral was a professional requirement, and I was grateful for it now. "I want you to know," he said slowly, "that I have not always known how to talk about what you do. Because I don't understand it. I didn't grow up around it, I don't speak the language of it, and when things are outside my experience I have a tendency to." He stopped. "I have a tendency to diminish them. Because it's easier than admitting I don't know." I said, "Dad, I know," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." He nodded. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out an envelope and set it on the table between us. I looked at it. "Your mother doesn't know I have this," he said. "Or she knows. She knew I kept it, she just doesn't know I brought it tonight." I picked up the envelope. It was old, the paper slightly soft at the edges, the way paper gets when it's been handled many times over many years. Inside was a folded piece of newspaper. A clipping, small, from what looked like a local Raleigh paper. And a photograph, printed on regular paper, the kind you'd print from a home printer. The clipping was from 2019. A brief notice about Army promotions in the region. My name was in it. Captain Madeline Ruth Garner, Fort Bragg. The photograph was from my commissioning ceremony. Someone had taken it from a distance. I didn't know who. I didn't recognize the angle. I was in my uniform saluting, in a photograph taken at an event my father had not attended. I sat with that for a long moment. "How did you get this?" I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. "I have friends," he said, simply. As if that were a sufficient answer. I looked at the photograph of my 22-year-old self. She looked so young. She looked like someone who was trying very hard to hold it together. "You kept this," I said. "I've kept everything," he said. "Articles. Anything I could find. Your mother thinks I throw them away, but I don't." He paused. "I have a whole folder." I set the photograph down on the table. I looked at my father. At this man who had not come to my commissioning and had not asked about my promotions, and had called my uniform decorations over the phone, and I tried to understand how both things could be true at the same time. The folder and the phone call. The pride and the silence. I thought about something Theodore Webb had said to me in our first phone conversation. When we were talking about Abby's grandfather, he'd said, "Some men from that generation, they show love like a rock shows water. Doesn't mean there's no water, just means you can't always see it moving." I'm not sure my father's generation explains it entirely. I'm not sure any explanation is sufficient, but I was sitting across from him in the reception hall of my brother's wedding, with a newspaper clipping in my hands that he had kept for 6 years. And I was 33 years old, and I was tired of carrying the full weight of the distance between us. "This doesn't fix everything," I said again. "I know," he said. "I'm going to need you to actually show up," I said. "Not just keep a folder. I need you to ask me real questions and actually listen to the answers. I need you to come to things that matter to me even if you don't understand them." He was quiet. "Can you do that?" I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "I want to try," which is not the same as yes. I knew that. I was raised by this man, I knew the difference between a commitment and an intention, and what he had offered me was an intention. But I was 33, not 19. I knew that intentions are where things begin. I picked up the envelope. I folded it and put it in the small clutch I'd brought for the evening, the only non-regulation item in my possession that night. "I'll keep it," I told him. He nodded. I thought I saw something move in his face. Relief, maybe, or something older than relief. Something that had been waiting a long time to put down its luggage. We sat together for a few more minutes, not talking much, which with my father had always meant more than talking. Then my brother appeared from across the room, slightly flushed from dancing, and stopped when he saw the two of us at the table. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. He let out a long breath that I recognized as the breath of someone who has been holding something for longer than he wanted to admit. I drove back to Arlington the next morning on I-85 North while the sun was still low enough to be in my eyes. I had the windows down even though it was October and the air had teeth, because I needed to feel awakened, real, and present. I thought about the room full of people who had stood up, the way that had felt. Not like vindication. Exactly. Though maybe a little like that too, but more like evidence. Evidence of something I had built and earned and become over 11 years of showing up. And that showing up had mattered. Had been seen by the people positioned to see it. I thought about the envelope in my clutch. I thought about my father at 19, probably sitting at his own kitchen table, being handed a future, shaped exactly like his father's future. Never questioning it, never being given reason to. I thought about how that shapes a person, what it does to your ability to imagine that other futures are equally valid. I wasn't ready to forgive everything. That's not how it works. And I'm suspicious of stories where it does, where the single conversation dissolves a decade of accumulated distance. That's not what happened. What happened is that a door opened slightly, and there was light on the other side of it, and that was enough for now. I had driven about 40 miles when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I waited until a rest stop to check it. It was a text from my father. 6 words, which is more than he usually manages. "Proud of you. Always have been." I sat in the parking lot of that rest stop for a moment. A family was loading back into an SUV 2 spots over. A little kid dragging a stuffed animal. A dad hoisting a diaper bag. Ordinary life, proceeding in all directions. I typed back, "I know, Dad. I know." And then I pulled back onto the highway heading north, the sun finally behind me. The road opening up ahead into whatever was next.